So welcome everybody back to our series on using SQL change automation to make some changes and automate our database development process. I'm Steve Jones from Redgate Software, and I am here with Kendra Little. Welcome. She's over there actually. But,
yeah.
I've got three screens, so everything feels slightly spread out. So on our main screen, I've got the repo or the DevOps project that Kendra created, and you can see over on the right-hand side there's the one pull request that Kendra approved in our last video. So if you want to see how that works, you can look at the last video, or if you go back 2 videos, you'll see how I created it. And then we've had 4 commits in total by 2 authors, which is you and I guess. I don't know who's committed more stuff, but
it's a massive development effort.
Yeah. And in our repository, we have our Northwind project. So it's a SQL change automation project where we've loaded up the Northwind database. So we've got all of our changes in here, the changes that Kendra made. She made that wonderful index, and I made a table. We've got our schema model that shows all the items in there as well, the tables, and the various other parts of the project. But now we want to try to automate or verify some of the changes that we've made will still work. So I made things on my machine, they worked great. That's usually a wonderful metric. Kendra, you made changes on your machine, I assume they all worked?
I hope so.
So we're simulating development here. This is real life development.
I mean, this Northwind code that we imported, it is a classic code base, but that doesn't mean that it all compiles. Right?
Correct.
I mean, I guess we do know certain things about it because when we imported it in and created the baseline, right, we successfully populated the shadow database. But it is an important thing over time as we keep making changes to make sure that the code also compiles, because we could do crazy things to it, right? We could have a view that references tables, and I could drop one of the tables out from under the view, not realizing, hey, there's a view that references these tables, and then suddenly now the view won't compile, right? It won't create successfully, and we want something to alert us to that.
Right, or one of us upgrades our SQL Server without telling the other one, which I never do that. Like, I'm the last to upgrade typically, but I do work with people sometimes that upgrade at an insane rate.
Yeah, and start using the new syntax that doesn't work on the old versions. I might be guilty of that.
Yeah. So what we want to do is implement continuous integration, which the idea there is that as we merge changes, we let the automated system go verify things independently of either of our computer systems. So on this screen, if I go to the pipelines item, you'll see I get a number of choices here. And what we want to do is start with the builds area, and that is where we start continuous integration. Now, Azure DevOps calls this a pipeline, which is essentially a way of saying we're moving software through these stages. And the first stage is to validate that all of our code compiles, which is kind of the lowest bar of things. Can I take all these .SQL files, all these migration scripts, all these stored procedures and views, and actually execute them on a SQL Server version and see if they get created? So this walks me through some of this. You can see at the top there is a 4-step process that we connect to our code. We'll pick some things, configure some things, and create the pipeline. It's kind of the stages we'll go through. And the first thing it asks me is, where is my code? Now, this used to be much different. I don't know, Kendra, how long you've been working with this, but it used to be we had a lot of, I think Bitbucket was there and generic Git was there. There were various things, but now they've streamlined it to just the Microsoft stuff, which is Azure DevOps Repos and GitHub.
Yeah, and it's cool that they've made it really easy. If you've got existing code over in GitHub, they've made the process of using these pipelines without having to move all your code over. They've made that simpler now, so that's pretty cool if you're a GitHub user.
Correct, right, and we could actually be pulling, we could set up multiple pipelines. So I could be pulling SQL change automation projects, we could be pulling C# projects, we could do ASP.NET stuff, all from different places, so it would work fine here. So let's say Azure DevOps Repos, because that's what we did. And you'll notice it kind of looks through our project space and picks the only repo we have. So we could have multiple repos, which we haven't done yet. I think we'll get there at some point, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's pubs.
Yeah.
It's a very
we're gonna build a cross database application with Northwind and pubs at some point.
It's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be magnificent.
Beautiful. So in the configure area is where we start to pick our pipeline, and these are really templates that Azure DevOps is set up for us. So typically there's a lot of people that build ASP.NET stuff, so those are at the top. Certainly there's Windows applications, there's Xamarin applications, et cetera, that we could do. I'm going to pick this starter pipeline one because it's a minimal pipeline. We used to have an empty pipeline that you could create. They've done away with. If I do show more, what I'll see is, all of these, let me come in here, different types of projects. So there's Android there, right? If I want to build Docker or Go or anything else, I could do that. And actually, interestingly enough, the first time I saw this, Kendra, was from Donovan Brown. He was showing me how to build a Java project in what was then Visual Studio Team Services, but is now Azure DevOps. So.
Right. I think they just finally renamed OnPrem TFS to like Azure DevOps on-prem or something like that too. So not only will the options on this screen change over time, the name of the thing you're logging into may change over time as well. It does keep it exciting.
So this gives me, I had this the other day, actually, I was setting this up. It brings me to a YAML file to start with, which while I think the geeky people at Microsoft think this is cool, this is the most annoying thing I've ever seen in my life.
I agree. I am not a big fan of this new, here's your YAML starter pipeline. I actually did figure out that there's a way to see the legacy create screen that actually just lets you do create an empty pipeline. It's
Yeah. So I think if I actually go back, if I were to go back, I could do it and say, pick the visual editor. I'm just going to say save and run and let this go. So then you can see it on this one, right? So if I said new, maybe this is what I did before.
Yeah. If you do new build pipeline there.
Connect, and we said use the visual designer.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully there's some way to get into the visual designer for another one, but this seems to be the easy way to get into it that just gives you the classic selection.
So let's just say if I go back, will it remember that, or will it just be like, sorry, you're still stuck with YAML, still stuck with YAML. And maybe this is what I did the other day where I actually just had to create one and then abandon it. So let's just go through this quicker this time.
Okay.
We'll say this is Azure Repos, and we'll say it's the Northwind master, and then we'll say an empty job. And so that gives me the very basics. And you'll notice over here, let me get rid of my, this is my list of tasks down here, and they kind of run in order in general, though I think you can parallelize some things if you wish to. But in essence, I've kind of got three things. So I've got an overview container, that's my pipeline. I have a task that downloads my repo. And then I have an agent, which actually starts to do work. And what I need to do is add tasks in here to actually validate my database. So over here on the right-hand side, we have various things. So I'm going to call this build Northwind database. And that'll change the very top. And I think that's easier for us to remember, right, Kendra? We get that?
Wait, this is building what?
Yeah. Well, I assume sometime we'll build pubs and we'll have compile our C# application that you're going to write to do something.
Or absolutely. Northwind is a very bustling business.
Yes.
But now we need to pick our agent pool. So we have options for the agent pool.
Right. So all of these hosted agents are ones that run in Azure. So in the Azure cloud, these are those VMs that pop up, and you can see that I have various types of items. So I have macOS and Ubuntu, and then I have a hosted Visual Studio 2017, which I assume is a Windows 10-ish container, I think.
Yeah. It is just so crazy.
VM, right?
It's so crazy to be in Microsoft's Azure DevOps and have it be like, hey, you want to build on hosted macOS?
Right. This one is amazing because now you can do iOS stuff if you really wanted, right, or Mac stuff. I've typically used just a plain hosted one, or what I've done is down here is I set up my own agents and have them run on premises. But there's these other choices. I think for us, we're validating kind of what we're doing right now. You're using Visual Studio 2017, right?
Yeah.
Not 2019. You're not going to break the project next week with.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll try not to.
Yeah. So we'll use this thing, which will fire that up. We could have our own pool. So I was going to do this earlier. So I actually have an agent on this machine here. This is locally on my machine. If I run this, this connects to Azure DevOps on a different account. And what it allows me to actually do is say, run that build from this resource. So on my computer. So a lot of people do this first because they want the build to take place in their environment on the SQL Server they've installed in QA or something else. And so they want the agent to deploy or build in that particular environment. Yeah. And so this is typically how I do things, but Kendra suggested we avoid that today.
Well, and the option of using the hosted agent is really lightweight. Now, we can't do it all the time. So if we're using this built-in agent, the SQL Server it's going to use is just a local DB. It's a really lightweight, inexpensive version of SQL Server. So if we were running a build for something that required things that aren't available in local DB, like in-memory OLTP, or anything that had what do you call it, full text indexes or something like that. LocalDB doesn't do that, so we would need to set up a special build machine. But this one, Northwind's pretty simple. It can build on LocalDB, which is just nice, lightweight, and convenient when you can do it. So it can be a nice portable option.
Right. And so here you see I clicked over to the pool settings. You can see I have all these agents. I have the ability to do some minor changes of things. I can do some, I think what they're called is demands, to force some software or some changes to be set on these machines. So there's limited ability. So potentially I could actually call something that went out to the PowerShell gallery to update my agent pool or my particular agent. Yeah, Donovan showed me some neat things you can do here, which is kind of interesting, but I haven't played around with it a lot because in general, if I'm doing things for Redgate, I only get so many build minutes in Azure before they start charging me for this time, because this took, when we did that build, it took a minute, and this one will take a little bit of time. So I'm always cognizant of how much I'm building. But as Kendra said, this is fantastic because I don't need an extra machine or a server on premise or somewhere else that I connect to.
Yeah.
So I've configured this. Now I go to my get sources, and I usually go here to verify things. And the other thing I do, Kendra, often is I clean my system.
Clean.
So what this does,
it
wipes out the repository and lays down a new version. On a hosted agent, you don't really need to do this, but on your local agent, sometimes this causes you problems.
Oh, interesting.
If you don't clean the repo out.
Okay.
So that's really the only change I make here. And then I go to my agent. And so if I were building on premise or something, I might say this is, I'm building somewhere else. Here, I often might just change this to the hosted agent, just because when I look at this on the left-hand side, it just reminds me what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a good practice thing I have here. And I don't usually mess with anything else here. But then I need to add a task, because right now my agent won't do anything.
Right. Yeah, we've got an agent, but what do we want it to do?
So when I click this plus, you'll notice here on the right-hand side, it says add tasks. And then I've got all of these little settings that filter out what I can see. So I see all tasks. There are certain tasks that are designated as build or utility or test or package or whatever. I could use any of them in build, any of them release, any of them anywhere. But in general, sometimes it's a little bit easier. But there are a lot of tasks. Have you looked through here, Kendra?
I typically type the word red into the search bar and have not looked through there.
You don't like just scrolling down through the list of all these tasks?
There are many, many, many tasks.
They're amazing ones.
Like, we just passed magic chunks.
Did you? I saw that too.
There's cake.
Right. There's pastor, tester, runner, build task. Right there. I swear, there's everything I've ever thought about in building software or ever heard about in a college class is listed here.
Yeah.
But I'm like Kendra,
probably in there.
Yeah, I usually type red or Redgate sometimes, which cleans it up for me. Now these tasks are tasks that Redgates have put out there. You do have to add these to your account. And so if you go to my blog, maybe I should do that. I can't type. Let's just go there. I actually have a thing, and if I search, let's do extension. I think that'll get it there. So it says add the ready roll extensions, which was the old name, but this kind of explains how you add a task to your account. to the marketplace. So to get it to show up in tasks, you can do that. The short answer is if you click this little marketplace icon too, you can easily add the task to your account so that it shows up. But Kendra's done this, and I know it's Kendra's because I have more tasks in mine that exist.
I think actually I haven't installed these yet from the marketplace. So see how it says get it free? I think I actually haven't added these to the organization yet from the marketplace.
Oh, you haven't? Look at that. So we'll have to do this then.
Yeah. Because you do this I've got multiple organizations, and I've done this in some of my organizations, but not in all of them. But this is super useful because people need to do this as part of setting up the build.
Oh, so please add this. So Kendra is going to get a note to add this.
I didn't realize I was actually slacking here. Let me go ahead and approve this.
So we see now, this now says add as opposed to get it free, right? So the release task says get it free. So Kendra hasn't added that, but she has added the build
Working
task
on it.
That now says installed. So I can pick this task and add it, and it appears over here on the left-hand side. And again, it notifies me that some settings need attention because there is a little bit of configuration that has to take place. So if I click on the task, I have a bunch of items now over here on the right-hand blade. The biggest one I want to point out at the very beginning is because sometimes I add tasks I don't really need. This is the place to remove them. I can't remove them from this list for some reason. There's versioning on these tasks. I think we replace the task if we do a major version upgrade. But in any case, I get a number of choices here. Again, I get a display name. We're going to call this build the database on local DB. So I like to add some metadata in here that just helps me to understand what these tasks are, because I've seen these pipelines that have 20 or 30 tasks, and it is so difficult to keep track of what's happening. The next stage is to pick my project. So to do that, I'll use the ellipsis here, and this actually goes to my repo and lets me find my project. And so in this case, I pick the SQL proj file and say that's the one I want to build. Now it's possible, and Kendra, we didn't do this, we might have a folder below our repo that says database, or it might say Northwind and then pubs, which I think we might have to fix going forward at some point, but in any case, I pick that. And then I need an output package. And so I normally name this just the name of the database, but you can pick whatever.
Yeah, and this like if you want 2 letters, you can do 2 letters. If you want Northwind, you can do Northwind.
And this package is essentially a view of the version control system, or the state of our project at this point in time, because that allows us to then deploy from this known version to other environments. Because if we go back to version control, since Kendra is working in master and not a branch, version control might have changed by the time we actually decide to send this to QA.
Awkward.
And we don't want that, right? We want to take something we know builds and use that. So for right now, that doesn't really matter. We'll just call it NW. That's easy to see. And then the next thing I have to do is decide how to build this project, because there's no compiler for SQL Server code outside of an instance. Right? We have to use local DB or SQL Server instance installed somewhere to actually compile things. So we get the choice. We're going to use local DB because it's lightweight, it's small, and more importantly, it's on the hosted agent.
And it's free.
It's free. And I usually leave published artifact there. You can integrate with SQL Doc, which will actually call the SQL Doc executables and document the code from the database if you want. I don't normally do that. You could require a specific version of SQL Change Automation if you choose. I haven't had occasion to require this as of yet, especially with the extension updates in Visual Studio automatically, so I haven't worried about that. And then I haven't worried about some of these other items. So I could increment my NuGet package version with the build ID. Do you ever do this, Kendra?
I do that, just because then when I'm looking at the files, it's just really obvious which
version. Yeah, and so I actually like to do this as well. Now there's a trick when we get to the release to actually figure out what we're doing, how to get the right one. But so we'll leave that done. Occasionally I have multiple tasks I'm testing. I do disable tasks at times here. So just this is where you do it. And I have not had occasion to mess with the rest of this. But once I've done all this, the changes have taken effect, because you'll notice over on the left, there's no red notice that something is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't saved these changes yet, so I have to come up here and save them, which essentially commits that wonderful YAML file to our version control system somehow. Now, this save in queue item is actually didn't exist for the first 3 years of Visual Studio.
Really?
And so you had to click save.
Who would ever want to run the build they just modified?
Yeah,
Wait,
you had to
everyone.
click save, and then you would come back and click queue. And at build, I think it was 2 years ago, I sat at the Microsoft desk with a bunch of other people and said, could you please do save and queue? And what was fascinating was a whole bunch of people chimed in, and so the PM that was there just added it to a list from the booth, and then 3 months later it appeared.
The people want to run the build they just modified to test it. That's a weird use case.
I know. So once I click save and queue, I get the save comment. So this is the save section up here.
Mm-hmm.
That says this is what I want to do, just like I would commit my code. This is the queue section of things. So it takes the defaults I've set for my hosted agent, my branch, all that stuff. I could override them here if I so chose. But I'm just going to say save and queue. And you'll notice what has happened at the top where you say build number 2 has been queued. And that will actually run, but before I go look at that, let me just go back to my history. And you'll see that we have this build Northwind database. It's actually running. And there's the other build.
Right. That's the one that we set up just as YAML, and then we're like, we're tired of this YAML.
Yeah, we don't like the YAML piece of it. There's that one, there's this one. So let's see what's going on. The neat thing I think about the build process with Azure DevOps is that I can see what's happening live here.
Yeah.
So even if I have hosted agents on my machine, or they're taking place in a data center, or they're at Azure, it's letting me know at each step what's happening. So the initialized job is, set my build variables, just get everything kind of ready. The checkout is the normal Git stuff. So if you use Git in the command line like I do, you'll see that this is kind of the normal stuff you would see if I did a Git clone or a Git checkout, right? It grabs the stuff that it needs and it starts to pull it down to my machine. So it's the same. There's nothing magic here, I guess, right? This is just doing what we would do manually if we had to build this system. And now we're in the Redgate thing. Now, the one thing I don't like, this doesn't give me a ton of output right away. This has been fairly lightweight, I guess, maybe. Now you'll notice Kendra and I didn't license anything. We just installed this. So it's kind of an honor system, right? That your license entitlement should be in place with us. Right? This requires a tool belt license, which I have. Do you have one, Kendra? Are we good?
I do. I
Okay.
do. As an employee of Redgate, I am empowered to license myself.
Which I've done numerous times, yes. The one thing is this is actually running the PowerShell. It's running this invoke database build commandlet to actually run the build. So in real time, this is taken, you can see the counter over here on the right. It's almost 2 minutes. It's validating our project, and then it will run essentially the build, what Kendra did when she deployed it.
The free machine that it's letting us run on, I think we can safely assume that we've got one little core on a tiny little machine that's just kind of chugging its way through on a host that's doing other things. So
yeah,
I have noticed that if I use my own build server, once the build starts on my local build server, it runs pretty darn fast. The free one is real nice, but it's not this speediest. But look at that.
Yeah, so it finished, it worked correctly. So we did a new database build artifact, we export that, and it built this NuGet package right here. So it noticed it picked my name, it did NuGet version 1.0, and then it puts the build number right here. So that's a NuGet package. Then it actually uploaded that artifact, which we could then access in later steps or later pipelines or releases or anything else.
Right.
And then it has just a few other steps about finalizing the job and all that kind of stuff.
But we have had a successful build of the code. We now know that the committed code at this point, we were building out of the commit to master, that it all can be successfully created out of a SQL into a SQL Server database from the version that is in source code. So that's actually a pretty great thing to know about your database code.
It is, and one of the cool things to me is that we get this kind of history of what happened in this build. So we can see that it certainly succeeded, and there's an artifact here. But we noticed that this wasn't an automated thing. This was something that Steve queued up right here. And then we see all the committed changes that are in this build. So all the things that Kendra did, right? She had the project files, initial baseline, and then she had her
yeah.
What was this?
I am really great at naming indexes. It's true.
I created a status. We had the PR that was merged, and then we kicked in. We had a pipeline here. Even on that tiny machine, it took 3 minutes to do this build, which was fantastic. We didn't do any tests, but it's still there that we've got this build that we can trace back to what went into it and what changes were made. So over time, this becomes useful when we're trying to figure out what did we actually release to production, right? Yeah. The last thing I think I want to show is that if I now edit this build.
Are you going to set the build trigger?
I'm going to set the build trigger. Yes. So right over here, this build trigger. So what this will do is when I enable this is allow me to decide when does this automatically run. So I don't need to hit Q, or Kendra doesn't need to hit Q.
Right.
And so typically, right, I set this to say, go off of whatever branch we're pushing stuff into.
Right.
Right. Which might not be master. It could be some development branch or something else, but I could certainly add more ones. So I could include Steve if I wanted to and have it build. But I'm not going to do that. We're just going to build on master, and we're going to build for every commit. So this button up here would allow me to say include maybe 2 or 3 commits from different people in there in one build, right? Which is kind of a resource saving thing. In general, I like to just do one, whoever has done that merge or that commit, let's just build their stuff so that we have less things to look at when we break the build.
Yes, we want it to be easy to figure out what broke the build if the build is broke.
Right, because I break the build regularly, so it's good to do. We could schedule builds, we could do all that stuff. There are a number of options that you can pick that if they're relevant to your situation, you can certainly do that. And then you can add variables, which are always interesting. There's a number of predefined variables, but sometimes I will add variables for example, a lot of times I do the build user, which is actually the user account I'd put in SQL Server locally, and then I would put some password in here. Or I would say, actually, this would probably be, I think what I use is VSTS builder as my account. And then I can reference this build user in my tasks to say, here is the variable that you want to use to connect to a SQL Server or a password or whatever else.
Yeah. So if you're building on a build agent on your machine, you don't have to put the account name and password in clear text in the pipeline. You can create a variable that secures it and then just revert to the variable name, which is quite nice.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing I often do. I say build user and build password, and then for the password, I make it a secret. And then in the tasks, what I would often do, and I'm not going to save this, but I would say this is ./SQL 2016 because I normally build locally. I don't need a database. But I would say here, this would be the build user, and this would be the build, I think I did PWD. But that would replace these 2 values with what I had here.
Yeah.
So.
And I always forget the syntax to use there, so now I'm glad we have that in this video. I'm always like, is there a $sign in there? I can't remember.
I know, because the one that always gets me is it's build number. When we do the NuGet package, that's actually the.
Oh yeah.
I have to spell that correctly, but that is what is actually being appended to the NuGet package right there.
Right.
So
a secret variable. Well, I guess it's not that much of a secret.
No, so I'm going to leave because we have unsaved changes. I don't need those. But there you have it. So you see, we've now successfully created continuous integration. So in future videos, all the changes that we merge or commit to master will kick off a build.
Yes. And if something happens where someone makes a mistake to break the build, we will also get to troubleshoot that. And from there, if we want to set up deployments on our pipeline as well, we will be able to do that too. So we got lots of fun stuff coming up.
Exactly. So look for future videos where we break the build and then fix it. Right.
I shouldn't be this excited about breaking the build, but I really want to break the build. So.
Well, honestly, when you set this up, you want to break the build a few times so that you know how to fix it, right? I mean, just break it.
Yeah, I love breaking things. So we're going to get together and we're going to break some stuff next time. So thanks for joining us for our tour of Azure DevOps build processes with SQL change automation. I'm Kendra Little from Redgate, and this is
Steve Jones.
And we'll see you again soon. Thanks, folks.
Bye.